ever meet. They deserve gold stars. They absolutely were I should say speechless at the Tea Party meeting. So, you know, it can be done, see? It can be done, folks. So I don't know what they give them before they come here, but it does seem to work. So I do appreciate everybody coming, and tonight we call this an introduction to the Federalist Papers, because what I hope to do tonight is set you up for a study that we're going to do this year over a period of 5 more months out of the months we have left, that will cover the topics, the content of the Federalist Papers. So maybe you've heard of them. How many of you have actually heard and maybe read some of the Federalist Papers? Have you? Good. Wow. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. It was something I'd always heard about. I had the book around the house. You know, I tried to read the first one and gave up. And then I began to hear more and more about it, people referring to them in my reading, and I thought, you know what, it's time to sit down and really figure out, why are these so important? Because even people that you wouldn't think would say they were important, like Supreme Court justices, will mention the Federalist Papers as a basis for their opinions. So that being the case, I thought we better find out what's in there, because if they can distort the Constitution, they can also distort the papers. So that is, I hope to inspire you this evening to stick with us throughout this year. We'll be having different presentations depending on when we can get speakers. It won't be me all the time. Sir James Sacco is going to be one of our presenters. Jean Clayton, an American history teacher, is going to be a presenter. George Phillips is going to come at some point and be a presenter, and those are just the 3 we have confirmed. We've got 2 or 3 others that we are going to be contacting to see if they can help. So it's going to be a really interesting time. And what we hope in the end is that you will be more sure about what the Constitution says based on what the founders said in their very own words. So you can back up your arguments with the words of the founders. So we're giving you some really serious handouts. It's not cheap to copy all of this, so I'm going to really encourage you to hang on to them and bring them each time you come. In fact, I do have some red folders here that I would suggest maybe that you put them in, and so that you'll have something that'll bring your attention to it. If you would like one of these, if you could just maybe drop $1 in our donation box, or maybe you already did, you're welcome to have one of these as well. So the 2 handouts that you have, the first one that I wanted you, and I don't have a copy of either one of them. Do we have, does Sandy have the copies? Well, let me grab yours for just a second. The first one, whoop, it's not that one. The first one is something that you'll be able to use all the time. And it's literally a list of all 85 of the essays that make up the Federalist Papers. The nice thing about this, when I found it, I said, boy, this is something we can use the whole year, is that it tells you the date it was written, it tells you the title of it, or generally what it's about, and it tells you who the author is. And that's really very important information as you read through the Federalist Papers. So keep this one for sure. There's some on the back of this page, and then continuing on the next page. The next handout that I gave you is actually a copy of all the slides I'm showing you tonight, minus the one that's up there right now, and one other one that you really didn't need. And it made it come out perfectly to 3 per page. And you have lines on which you can add some additional information, because I'll be talking and explaining a little bit more for some of the points that are made. So you might want to have a pen or a pencil handy you can refer back to it. Once you see all the information I'm giving you, you can refer back to it like a study guide, one of those cheat sheets, so you can refer to it and not have to read through everything. You'll know what's going on. Okay. Any questions about what I've said so far? All right. Oh, he's got to go get his pencil. All right. Well, tonight we're going to begin that study of the Federalist. And in the time that it was compiled together, it was called the Federalist. It wasn't until the 20th century that it was changed to the Federalist Papers. A little bit of history right there. So my goal is to provide you with an introduction which will cover the following objectives, so you'll know where we're going tonight. The first one is, when was it written? The second objective tonight is, why was it written? The third objective, who wrote it? And the fourth objective is, what is the Federalist? Throughout the rest of the year, we're going to have guest speakers who will present the information in the rest of the papers based on 6 subject areas that were developed by Alexander Hamilton. These will be the meeting topics for 5 additional months this year. The rest of the months will be devoted to other topics such as Common Core that we had last month in January. We'll have our patriotic picnic in June or July. We're going to have a candidates forum this year, probably in October, and of course our annual Christmas party in December. That leaves us with 2 or 3 other months that we'll be filling in with other topics. So it won't be the Federalist Papers every single month. So we hope you'll be here for all the sessions, but especially for the study of the Federalist Papers. The AFRTC board chose this extensive study because of the importance of the information in the papers regarding interpreting the Constitution. It is considered to be the best source for understanding the founders' interpretation of the Constitution in their very own words. It is still used by the Supreme Court today. So this study is going to help us to know what the truth really is regarding many issues we are facing today. We will be able to defend our arguments using the founders' own words. Now, nothing could be more powerful than that. So here's what we're recommending. We are recommending a paraphrased copy of the Federalist Papers, and I have my copy right here. And this paraphrase was written by Glenn Beck a couple of years ago. It was available. You can find it on Amazon under the used book section, actually brand new, but under used for like $1.25. The shipping is $3.99, so you'll pay about $5 for the book, but it's a lot cheaper than going to Barnes & Noble and purchasing. It'll probably be more like $16 or $20 there. So pick up a copy of this, because we're giving a copy to each of our speakers, and they'll be using this to help them develop their lessons that they will be presenting. And it's kind of the difference between reading the Bible in the King James Version versus the New Living Standard. Is that what it's called? The NIV? The NIV, the New International Version. Yes, the New International Version. It's in modern English. Now, I do suggest you get a copy of this as well. This is the Federalist Papers original. This is by Bantam Books, and they are printers of classic books, all kinds of classic books. And it contains the original arguments written in the original language with the spelling that they used, and even some marginal notes that were put in there by James Madison. So what's fun to do, and what we're recommending, is that you read one of the essays 2 or 3 times, and then read it in here, and see if you interpreted it correctly. And it'll be a very interesting study. At least I have found it interesting. So if you don't have access to the internet, if you would see me after the meeting, I would be glad and order a book for you. I do have some books up here. As I said, each of the board members of AFRTC has one. They purchased one, and we're giving a free one to all of our speakers. I do have a couple extra tonight that I could sell for $5 if you are interested. So if there's no other questions about what I've just said, we'll continue on. I can find my clicker. Okay. Here we go. So the first thing we're going to talk about tonight is when were the essays written? So you may recall that the Constitution had just been signed by the delegates in the Constitutional Convention September 17, 1787. And just 2 days later, the Constitution was actually published for the first time in the Pennsylvania Packet, which was a newspaper. 2 days after that, the very first anti-Federalist essays began appearing in New York newspapers. So the anti-Federalists were just waiting for this document to appear, and they were ready to put it down and convince people not to ratify it. So Alexander Hamilton realized right then and there something had to be done to put down all of the criticism that the new plan was getting. So what he did was make a list of topics that he wanted to cover in a series of essays, but he knew he himself could not write them fast enough. And he purposely wanted them written fast and furiously so that people would not have a chance to even respond to all of the arguments for the Constitution. So he published the first essay. It was actually published in October 27th, 1787, in 3 New York City newspapers. And he asked 2 other authors to help him do this, that we'll be discussing in just a few minutes, so that they could write the essays. They were averaging 4 and 5 a week. So imagine writing that many letters to the editor a week yourself. So they were very busy men. So by January 1st, 1788, a company called the McLean Company made an announcement that they were going to gather the first 36 and make a book of it. So by March 2nd, 1788, you had the Federalist, a collection of essays, is finally published. So the first 36 were bound together in a single volume with a preface written and corrections made by the author, which was later to be revealed Alexander Hamilton. Then moving on to April 2nd, 1788, Federalist number 77 was published, and it was the last essay to be published in New York serial newspapers. On May 28, 1788, the Federalist Volume 2 was published, and that included numbers 37 to 77. But you say, I thought you said there were 85. Yes, there are 85. So beginning June 14th and continuing through August of 1788, the last 8 unpublished Federalist essays finally appeared in the Independent Journal and the New York Packet. So now you can see how rapidly the 3 authors had to crank out 85 essays. Imagine you and 2 other people in this room putting out 85 letters to the editor in about 10 months, defending a new type of government. That averages out to a little over 8 essays each month. Well, it was a daunting task, to say at least. The rapidity of the appearance of the essays made it next to impossible for the anti-Federalists to respond to them, and of course that was part of the strategy. Now we move on to why were they written. One of the first reasons the Federalist Papers were written was to provide all the reasons to support the new plan of government described in the U.S. Constitution. The second reason is, you can recall recall the framers signed the Constitution on the 17th of September and published it on the 19th. By the 27th, the writer Cato first appeared in New York press criticizing the new plan of government. Well, this was followed by a writer named Brutus on October 18th. These and other articles and public letters critical of the Constitution would eventually become known as the Anti-Federalist Papers. And they were actually collected, and you can get that book as well. And among them, believe it or not, Patrick Henry. Some really well-known founders' names are in here that you would be surprised were absolutely dead set against the Constitution. So this is another book you need to include in your library, the Anti-Federalist Papers and the Constitutional Convention Debates. I haven't had a chance to read all of this, but I did read some of it, and it is quite interesting. So, in response, Alexander Hamilton decided to launch a defensive and extensive explanation of the proposed Constitution to the people of the state of New York. So these were primarily written for the people in the state of New York. He wrote in Federalist 1 that the series would endeavor to give a satisfactory answer to all objections which shall have made their appearance that may seem to have any claim to your attention. Once again, the Old English is kind of difficult to understand. So he recruited collaborators for the project that we will be discussing next. A third reason as to why they were written is the writers wanted to point out the problems with the Articles of Confederation, such as the inability to protect individual liberties because of a lack of the authority to do so. There were no means to enforce unity among the states or to stop a war or skirmishes that might come up between them. Also, the inability of the Articles to deal with other nations as a united front for commerce or protection with a single navy to improve wealth and protection for all the states. Of course, if you were a state on the seaside or seaboard, or you had a border on the sea, you could have ships to help defend yourself, but the inland states didn't have that kind of protection. So the suggestion was we need one navy that protects all of us. Although the responsibility of providing protection did exist in the Articles, the states retained all of their power and the control of the money to do so. So what happened following the Revolution was the same thing that happened during the Revolution. They never knew when they were going to get men and or money and or supplies. And it's just a wonder that we won under those circumstances. Truly God was with us at that point. So if you actually read the Articles, you'll see that the Constitution contains many of the same powers as the new government, only strengthened, and differ only in the number of states required to ratify the changes, requiring just 9 instead of the formerly required 13. Now, the nice thing about this book is it does include a copy of the Articles of Confederation. So I would suggest before you even read the Federalist, read the Articles of Confederation so you know what the 3 authors are talking about, what they're complaining about, what the problems were at the time. Okay, continuing on, we go to who? Who wrote the Federalist Papers? Probably the most important person that we would want to talk about tonight would be Alexander Hamilton. It was his idea to do this, to bombard New Yorkers with all of these essays. And he was very well known at that time throughout the states, and he had attended the Constitutional Convention as well. He was the originator of the idea of writing essays to support the ratification of the Constitution. In the end, he would contribute 51 of the 85 in less than a year. He also enlisted the help of John Jay, who was also making a name for himself throughout the states and was known for his jurisprudence skills. He did not attend the Constitutional Convention, but he was passionately involved in getting it ratified. He is given credit for the authorship of just 5 of the essays. He would have contributed more, but unfortunately, during a demonstration, he actually got shot. And it took him quite a while to recuperate from that incident, so he didn't write another one till almost at the end of the 10-month period when he wrote on the judicial branch. Okay, and the third writer, maybe someone you know, as James Madison, who was also asked by Hamilton to help write essays. Now, all 3 men were to write under the pseudonym of Publius, and Publius was the name of a Roman, I believe a philosopher, and in the Roman times, at the time of the Roman Republic, and very well thought of, and whose writings they really depended a lot on when they were writing the Constitution, as a matter of fact. So Madison had attended the Constitutional Convention. He was really the best recorder of notes at the convention. If you can get a copy, I do have a copy of his notes. It's a book about that thick. You will feel like you're right there in the convention because he writes everybody's name and what they said. Now, he has a little type of shorthand himself, but you'll be able to figure it out. He has a clever way of being able to write quickly. There was a secretary of the convention, but his notes are considered more important than the secretary. He contributed many ideas for the Constitution from what he submitted as the Virginia Plan. And of course, he was under the tutelage of Thomas Jefferson. He was like Thomas Jefferson's shadow, or what do you call it when they clone you? He was like a Jefferson clone. But Jefferson was not able to be at the convention. Doesn't it seem weird not to think of Jefferson at the Constitutional Convention? He was over in France at the time. But he had sent a huge amount of books to Madison to read, all about philosophy and all types of government. So he had prepared him well to assume his role at the convention. So Thomas Jefferson is usually credited for being the father of the Declaration of Independence, but his star pupil is credited with being the father of the Constitution. So interesting. Madison saw to it that the complaints about King George outlined by Jefferson in the Declaration were addressed in the Constitution so that those kinds of things would never happen again in America. So the two of them were very, very, very close. By the way, I don't know if any of you watched Fox News this morning. There was a little quiz for President's Day. Who was the shortest president? Do you remember? Madison. Yeah, I think he was 5'2", 5'4", 5'4". He was 5'4". Yeah, he was the shortest. Lincoln being the tallest. Yeah. But James Madison really was an extremely powerful force at the time the Constitution was written. In fact, he sat right up front, just, like this, across from Washington, where Washington sat. He sat right, he had his own little desk, and that's where he sat so he could hear and see and not miss a word. It is said that he contributed himself over 200 ideas during the 3 months that they were writing the Constitution. Now, I actually would like to go through a little bit of background information about the writers, to give you just a few what I thought were interesting points about them. Alexander Hamilton was actually born very poor, and he was orphaned early in his life. he was born in the British West, what was known as the British West Indies in Charleston, on Nevis Island. He was a precocious child. His father and mother never married. His father left his life, and a few years later, his mother died of a fever. He was then given to a cousin who took care of him for quite a while. He started attending school and was very precocious. He was especially a good writer. And he wrote a story that brought him almost national attention at the time about a hurricane that had come over the island, and his description of what had happened and what it felt like gained the attention of leaders in his area. They actually came together, collected money, and sent him to school in Elizabethtown, New Jersey, to the Elizabethtown Academy. So after he finished his elementary schooling in that academy, he went on to what was called King's College. Does anybody know the name of it today? It's in New York. Columbia. It's Columbia University now. But he graduated from King's College, it was called at the time. And then at that time, he was, of course, very interested in politics. News of the revolution was just, swirling around everywhere. Were they going to or weren't they? He became the leader of a military unit of his own, even in college, and helped protect the people around the New York area. He just wanted to help any way he could with the war. And what he didn't want to do was to become an aide to a general that had to stay in a tent and advise the general, take care of the. He thought glory came when you were on the battlefield, and so that's all he could think about was getting to the battlefield. However, when George Washington called him to be his chief of staff as a lieutenant colonel, he could hardly turn that down, and so he did agree to become a chief of staff. But all through the war, he begged Washington, let me lead some men, let me lead some men. And Washington would say, no, I need you here, I need you here. He was a very well-organized, very thorough person, and Washington really depended on him a lot. Well, finally, Washington relented toward the end of the war, and he gave Hamilton 3 battalions of men and told him to march on a certain side of the peninsula where Yorktown was situated. And it was actually his 3 battalions that surprised the British, captured the whole army, and thus began the end of the Revolution, as we know. So we can give him maybe Washington should have listened to him earlier. He quit his command as soon as he could, and he became a congressman of the Confederate Congress in 1782, but things didn't go well there. He just couldn't seem to get anything done, so he quit. And then in 1784, he founded the Bank of New York. It's the oldest bank that still is available to you in our country, the Bank of New York. Then, of course, as you know, he became involved with writing the Federalist Papers as the lead author. And then he was called by Washington to be his Secretary of Treasury. He was the very first Secretary of Treasury. He served from 1787 to 95, all 8 years of Washington's presidential term. And he really set in motion the financial rules and regulations that our country mainly still follows. He wanted Washington to start a national bank, and they did. It turned out to be, like the Fed, a disaster. And And Washington writes about it being one of his worst decisions. He wished he had never listened to Hamilton about the National Bank. But he knew from his experience in the Confederate Congress that it was such a problem getting money and men and supplies because there was no power in the government, that he knew something had to be done. And actually, it was Alexander Hamilton, when they had the convention at Annapolis, it was his resolution that was put forth that said, fellas, we need to meet again in Philadelphia. We need to scrap this document and we need to write a new one. And that's exactly what they did. And of course, his good friend James Madison was right there backing him up. This is what we need to do, folks. We've got to, the Union is falling apart. There were skirmishes here and there all over the colonies. States were acting independently with commerce and making allegiances with foreign nations, and the whole tone of the country was going downhill, kind of like we feel today. And they knew, we've got to stop this and stop it right now. So he was part of really leading the decision to go ahead and do something about it. So you might know about his kind of infamous death on July 12, 1804. He was a real thorn in the flesh for a man, do you remember his name? Aaron Burr, yes. Twice it was through his writings and persuasions that Aaron Burr ran for different offices like governor of New York, and he lost because of Hamilton. And then Hamilton said something that was beyond the pale, and Aaron Burr said, okay, we're going to have a duel over this. So that's what they did. They met, actually it was July, must have been July 10th, that they actually had the duel. Now, in those days, the upper class, when they had duels, each knew they weren't really going to shoot each other. You know, they just had to defend their honor. So, like, you know, in true form and custom, Alexander Hamilton drew his gun and shot over Aaron Burr's head. But Aaron Burr did not shoot over Alexander's head. He shot him right in the abdominal area. And 2 days later, he died. I think he was only 47, something like that. So we lost a great one that day, really over nothing. So unfortunate things happen. So we'll go on now and take a quick look at this gentleman. This is John Jay. He was born December 12th, 1745, in a completely different class than Alexander Hamilton. He was from a very wealthy merchant family in New York City. Both of his parents had come from wealthy families. He actually spent his childhood in Rye, New York. And he was educated by private tutors. He was then sent to New Rochelle for private lessons. And then after 3 years of schooling there, he returned home for more homeschooling. He too went to King's College, which is now Columbia, where he met a lot of many influential people. He graduated in 1764, and he became a law clerk for a prominent politician. He passed the New York State Bar, and in 1771, he established his own law firm. He married Sarah Livingston, also in 1774, and she was 11 years his junior. But even though he came from a wealthy background, John Jay was not without trials and tribulations in his life. His father died young, and he, being one of 12 children, was left with the responsibility of those 12 children. And they all seemed to have some problems. 2 of them were blind. One suffered from mental disabilities, another brother was in constant financial trouble, and another was in constant conflict with him over political issues in the political arena. So he had a lot on his plate, let's just put it that way. He did at first, he was kind of with the Loyalists until he began to see what the British soldiers were doing to American citizens, and that completely turned him off. What happened at Boston and so on, and he just did a 180, and he just became a patriot to the nth degree, and turned his back on all of his Loyalist friends, who were all the rich people. So it was not a popular thing in those days to be wealthy and to be a patriot at the same time. Probably isn't today either, is it? So, some interesting things about him, let's see, we'll catch up here. He was a delegate to the Continental Congress, the First and the Second Continental Congresses. And then following the signing of the Constitution in 1787, he agreed to help write essays to defend it. He knew if this didn't go through, the nation was in big trouble. He wrote 4 about the dangers of foreign force, and then 1 essay later on the powers of the Supreme Court. His life accomplishments is that he actually drafted the Constitution of New York. He was Chief Justice of the New York Supreme Court for 2 years. He was a delegate to the Continental Congress. He was Secretary of Foreign Affairs all during the Revolution. And but John Jay would say his greatest accomplishment was in fighting slavery, even though he owned slaves himself. In 1777, he led efforts in New York to abolish it, but it failed because they couldn't agree on what rights the slaves would have upon emancipation. They agreed they should be emancipated, but then what rights? Could they vote? There were a lot of issues like that. Jay was president of the New York Manumission Society in 1785, and he provided free legal counsel for all free slaves. And then when George Washington asked him to continue as Secretary of State under the new Constitution, he declined. Imagine declining George Washington. So Washington wasn't put off. He says, okay, how about Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? And he jumped at the chance. That's what he wanted to do. So the Jay Court spent the first 3 years primarily just involved in establishing the rules and the procedures and reading of commissions and admissions of attorneys to the bar. They only heard 4 cases during his chief justiceship. The first gave the court the opportunity to establish judicial review. Refused to take up a case regarding veterans because the legislative and executive branch would be able to change the court's ruling, thus violating the separation of powers. So on the night of May 14th, 1829, Jay was stricken with palsy, which probably caused the stroke that he had. He lived for 3 days, and he died in Bedford, New York on May 17th. He was buried in Rye, New York, in the family cemetery next to his estate. The cemetery is currently the oldest active cemetery associated with the Revolutionary War. And the last person we're going to take a quick look at is, of course, James Madison. He was born March 16, 1751 in Virginia. He also was from wealthy parents. They were tobacco farmers. You probably know that his father's estate was named Monticello. Have you ever been to Monticello?
Yes.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. If you haven't been, be sure to go. And actually, James Madison does not live too far, or not now, he doesn't live there, but his home is not too far from there. As a young man during the Revolutionary War, Madison served on the Virginia State Legislature, where he was, as we talked about, a protege of Jefferson, and that friendship lasted a lifetime, and it strongly influenced his political ideology. Then in 1780, Madison was chosen to attend the Continental Congress. He was the youngest and the shortest delegate there. He was considered a workhorse. In fact, he arrived early. He arrived several weeks early because he wanted to write the Virginia plan and have something ready to submit, you know, some kind of an outline for the Congress to work with. So later on, he was reelected to the Virginia State Legislature, where he could see that the Articles of Confederation just were not addressing the issues of the nation. He was a major instigator of the meeting. As I said, Madison and Alexander Hamilton joined forces in saying, we have got to have a constitutional convention. And at that time, he was only 36 years old, but all of these older men, the founders of our country, listened to him because he had such wonderful, well-reasoned arguments. He did not go to the convention unprepared. So now that a new plan of government had been framed, it needed to be ratified by 9 of the 13 states. And he realized that the anti-federalists were really having a heyday with it. And even though he was from Virginia, at the time he was in New York City because he was part of the Congress of the Confederation. So Hamilton, he was on hand to help Hamilton write the essays, and he agreed to write them, and he wrote 29 of the 85 essays. Madison went on to be a member of the U.S. House of Representatives for 8 years, Secretary of State under President Jefferson for 8 years, and then he followed Jefferson's presidency with his own for 8 years. Following his presidency, Madison spent most of his time concerned about how he would be remembered by posterity. This is really a sad story to a really great career. He became so obsessed about the way people would remember him and his service to his country that he actually started taking all of the letters and papers that were in his possession, and he started changing them because he would erase things. He actually even forged Jefferson's name on certain documents because he found out later that, you know, this issue was not favored by the people, so he wanted to change it so it looked like he was on the right side of that issue. He was just absolutely obsessed, and to the point where it really affected his physical health. He became bedridden with anxiety over his legacy, and his wife Dolly, who was 17 years his junior, he was so concerned about her. How would she survive? Because by then he was almost penniless. And our presidents certainly don't go penniless now, do they? Once they leave the presidency, usually they're multimillionaires. So the one thing he had been teased to sell were his notes from the Continental Congress, and he refused to do so. He wanted that to be Dolly's inheritance, and he figured she could get $100,000 for it. Well, other reading that I did showed, at least in one place, she actually only netted $5,000, I think it was for. Because by the time she sold it, people just weren't interested in what went on at the Congress, at the Constitution. They already knew, you know, some of their people were there. It was no big deal by the time she went to sell it. But she sold the mansion and bought a smaller home, and she made out okay. So, Continuing on, what is the Federalist? Well, if you look in Federalist 1, there's a quote there that probably describes what the Federalist is. It has been frequently remarked that it seems to have been reserved to the people of the country by their conduct and example to decide the important question whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. Well, that's what we call the big question. That was the elephant in the room that needed to be answered. So, this statement embodies what the framers saw as the big question on the table. Are the citizens of the country really adult enough, capable enough to take their future in their own hands and be capable of establishing good government for themselves? Or are they doomed to whatever government comes along, or might even be forced upon them? In modern English, that's the question that was being asked. So wow, what a challenge Alexander Hamilton lays out right in the very first Federalist essay. You know, are you up to the challenge, folks, or not? Can you do this? Do you want it? He really put their feet to the fire. And he challenged a young nation who had never had time to think about government beyond their own town or colony. However, by 1787 and the Revolutionary War behind them, and over 100 years of the taste of personal freedoms and property ownership, the American spirit of self-determination had blossomed, and the need for a government that could protect them from foreign nations but allow their coveted personal freedoms was something they could begin to understand why it was necessary. After all, the government they had wasn't working, and they had fought too hard to throw off the chains of tyranny to let it all slip through their hands. They knew they were at the tipping point of either sliding into anarchy or uniting to becoming a nation the framers thought they were capable of becoming. It was theirs to choose or reject. Thank God for us. They chose unity and a government just powerful enough to hold themselves together. So now we're going to take a look at the contents of the Federalists. Now, Alexander Hamilton says in the first Federalist, this is the way we're going to present these essays that we're going to provide for you. Of course, he was known as Publius, but these were the topics, in other words. The utility of the Union to your political prosperity, and what that means is the extent to which the Union will promote your political prosperity, the insufficiency of the present Confederation, or the inability of the current Confederation to preserve the Union, the necessity of a government at least equally energetic with the one proposed to the attainment of this object, in plain English, the necessity of a government that is at least as strong as the one proposed in the Constitution. The fourth topic he calls the conformity of the proposed Constitution to the true principles of Republican government, and in plain English, the ways in which the Constitution conforms to the principles of truly Republican government. The fifth and sixth topics are actually in Federalist number 85. It's analogy to your own Constitution, your own state constitution, and and the second part was the additional security which is adopted will afford to the preservation of that species of government, to liberty and to prosperity. or in plain English, the additional security which the Constitution will provide, not only to the Republican form of government, also to liberty and property. So these were the topics that were to be addressed by the three writers, and he tells the public in 3 or 4 New York newspapers, this is what you can expect to see over a period of time. Now, in the original argument, which is Glenn Beck's paraphrase, what you need to know that I was surprised about, it doesn't contain all 85 essays. There's only about 33 that he paraphrases in here. So don't be surprised when you get that. He divides the essays into a little bit different. The first one he calls A New Order for the Ages, and assigns numbers 1 to 11 and 85 to that. The second one he calls The Great Compromise, and he covers 23, 37, 41 to 44, and 51. The third he calls A Republic If You Can Keep It, and those are the numbers that he does paraphrase. The Delicate Balance of Power is the fourth one. The fifth one he mentions is Minimum Government, Maximum Freedom. And he has 5 essays for that one. The sixth one is Taxation with Representation. He paraphrases 3 of the letters. And the last one he calls Truth, Justice, and the American Way. And there are 2 of the essays that he paraphrases. So the nice thing about his book is that it includes a copy of the Constitution, and it's cross-referenced with the Federalist Papers. Very interesting. So as you read the Constitution, it'll say, see Federalist 39. You go back and look at Federalist 39, and you know the correct, or at least what the founders thought was the correct interpretation of the Constitution. And you know how they are just stretching phrases of the Constitution beyond reason. Yes, thank you. Beyond reason. It also includes a copy of the Articles of the Confederation, and also a speech made by John Jay, a wonderful speech, an address that he makes to the people of New York, pleading with them, please ratify the Constitution. Okay, so that's Glenn Beck's divisions of the articles, or of the Federalists. Okay, so going on, here's an outline that I found that I thought you would appreciate, and hopefully it's large enough so you can see it in your papers. I really wanted you to have a copy of this. It's actually in the front. If you get the Bantam book, classic book of the Federalist Papers, it's in the front of this. But I love the way it breaks down the papers, and it tells you exactly what each one is about. The number 1 point being the Articles of Confederation are inadequate to the Union's needs. And then underneath it, Gary Wills is the one who writes the introduction. I do not know if he did this, actually, if he did this content outline. He does write a wonderful introduction, though, very interesting introduction. But it didn't say that he actually wrote this. So you can see how he tells you what topics are underneath that. And then if you continue on, that the articles inadequate for trade, taxes, and management. He talks more on the extended republic, articles crippled by multiple sovereigns, just everything about the articles that they're having trouble with up through number 36. Now, these were all written about, by January of 1788. And that's when the McLean Company took the first 36, put them together, and put them in a book. And then the second point of the outline is the Constitution, a Republican solution to the Union's need. And it talks about the spirit of the Constitution, the quantity of powers, going on to the separation of powers and the essays involved, the House of Representatives and all the essays involved with it, going on to the Senate and the essays involved in that, the Executive Department and the essays involved in that, going on to the Judiciary Department, 78 through 83. And then at the very end, he just calls them miscellaneous objections. One of the biggest objections that really wasn't miscellaneous, it was a huge objection, was number 84. And that is, there was no Bill of Rights. That was a huge objection by the people of all colonies, because they were used to having a Bill of Rights. England had a Bill of Rights. And they were afraid, if you don't list the bill, if you don't list the rights, these are things this government could take away from you. So they had to quickly straighten that out. And they believed that the Constitution, as it was, did not need a Bill of Rights. So they actually wrote against having a Bill of Rights. But when Madison saw the fury that was around the country, he had to go back home to Virginia. He had to defend the Constitution to his state legislature, and he said, okay, if you've got to have a Bill of Rights, I promise you we will do that after the Constitution is ratified. He did not, a lot of people wanted to do the Constitutional Convention over, and the framers said, not a chance. We did this right the first time. You know, we feel it was God-inspired. We know how hard it was. We also know it'll never be done this well again. That's how confident they were of it. Although they didn't agree with all the parts of it, they were confident it was a good place to start. They didn't want to start putting rights and other things into the Constitution, and they said, there is a way to amend it. So Madison said, I will do a survey of what you want in the Bill of Rights. And if you remember when I did a speech on the Bill of Rights, he collected submissions from all of the colonies. There were over 200, and then he narrowed it down to 12. Yep, he narrowed it down to 12. One was just recently passed. Well, I say recently, what was it, 1990s, I think. And then one is still out there that has never been moved on. So that was a huge issue to the people. And then in '85, he points out how similar. He's saying, wait a minute, folks, look at your own state constitution. It's almost exactly like this new federal constitution, but with a little more power. And that's what they were afraid of. Very afraid of the little more power. And that has to do with federalism. It has different meanings in different places, but for our country at that time, that's essentially what they were talking about. The second theme that you'll find in the Federalists are the checks and balances that you hear. The word checks and balances together is actually, you won't find it in any of the Federalist papers. Checks is mentioned one place, balances mentioned another, and somebody somehow put the two of them together. It's really a spin-off of what we call mixed government. Each department of the American government is to speak to the same interest of that of the people. Now, in a mixed government, you could have the king, the aristocracy, the middle class, and the poor, all right, represented. And they would each speak only for their class of people. And that's what some of the Americans thought was going on with the House of with the House and with the Senate. That these were for the poor people, because there was a whole bunch of them, and they got kicked out of office every 2 years. But the elite people, well, they got to stay in 6 years, you know, and only a third of them were kicked out here and there. So they got the idea that no, we don't want that, and that's why they talked about the checks and balances, and that is that the American government, every branch is to speak to the same interest of all of the people. And that's what's unique about our government. The next word that's important for us in our vocabulary is separated powers, or separation of powers, you might hear. Again, a lot of these words are not in the Federalist in that particular way, but the idea is there, and which is a division of labor that serves all the people and increases efficiency, and the most important thing is it prevents tyranny. When you have well, it's supposed to. Don't laugh. I see you laughing back there. Something's happened to the executive nowadays, but whose fault is it? The legislature. For one thing, they have just given the executive more and more power to where you would think the president decides everything, that the legislature doesn't have an original thought of their own. And that is not the way our government was conceived. It was supposed to be the executive executed what the legislature decided the rules were going to be, or the laws, what the Senate and the House decided the laws would be, and how much they were going to cost, or it would take to pay for them. The executive, all they were supposed to do is just see to it that they were applied to everyone fairly. That was the job. A lot different nowadays. Another word you should become aware of throughout the papers is pluralism. Pluralism is a government of, for, and by the people, in which the politics of the country are defined by the wants and needs of the people. So, the wants and the needs of the people, that's what pluralism means. It isn't what the government decides the people want. It's the opposite of that. It's what the people want that the government is supposed to do. And another word is representation. And that refers to a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom will discern the true interests of their country with loyalty and patriotism, and not submit to petty local issues. Now, for a really good read on that, you want to go to Madison, that wrote number 10. I'm going to tell you the most important papers here in just a few minutes, but Madison in number 10 really spells that out very well for you. So, any questions up to this point? Or comments? Yes?
There was one that was talking about the power of the executive, legislative, and judicial. And then there was the federal, the state. Well, one was called separation of powers, one was called division of powers. When I learned that in school. Do you remember any of that? What was the difference between separation of powers and division of powers?
division.
Yeah.
Yes, because separation of power definitely involves the three branches.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah, separation definitely involves the three, as the founders conceived it.
Thank you. Second
Yeah.
question is, you mentioned that Glenn Beck focused on 33, or 34, whatever.
He only paraphrases 33 of them.
This guy, Willis, when did he do this? When-
Oh, Wills?
Willis,
Okay, this, he put this together, let's see, the year, let's see, this was published, well, as early as 1982, and recently in 2003, it was the latest edition. And what he did, he actually took a version from 1961 where, you see, isn't this a shame? None of the original manuscripts, the original essays in their writing exist. They've all been lost. So all they had were the newspapers from that time, and you know how editors, you know. So when they put together the first 36 in a book, this is why McLean had Alexander Hamilton, and remember, they're writing this under Publius. They don't want to be known. They don't want it known who's doing the writing. For one thing, it was dangerous at that time. People were very, very hot under the collar, let's put it that way, about it. So McLean took the 36 that had been written and he made a book out of it. Now, that is available. And then he made a second edition and put the rest of them, 37 through 77.
Did he use the newspaper articles to do it? Is that what you're saying?
No, he actually used the, yes, yeah, no, that's right. And he had Alexander Hamilton go through them to make sure that they were accurately written.
The newspaper articles.
Yes, yes, because the newspaper, you know how they do, they leave things out and change things and edit things. They call it editing.
Did this guy use the newspaper articles and then got Hamilton to verify that they were
Yes,
accurate?
yes, that's what he did.
So they were accurate.
So what?
So they were accurate.
Right, as accurate as Hamilton could make them.
No, he was saying that the newspapers reported it accurately.
Well, Hamilton had to go in and make some changes because they didn't come out exactly as they were written. The unfortunate thing is we don't have the original essays that were turned in.
So he's recalling what he actually thought he first wrote.
Well, the 51 that he wrote, and also trying to recall, you know, which ones they had written. As a matter of fact, there was dispute over, Hamilton actually claimed more of them, and then when Madison saw the claim, he said, no, he didn't write those, I did. So, and they have actually used computer technology to go through each of these essays to assign them, the different styles and so on.
But wouldn't Hamilton have used his original letters or his original documents to edit these newspaper articles?
If he had kept a copy, but remember, you know, once you sent a letter, it was gone. I mean, you didn't have a copy machine. Yeah, so if he didn't get them back, like you don't now, you send a letter to the editor, you don't get it back, so you have to save yourself a copy, so that's probably why they've been lost, yes.
Does anybody know what happened to the original essay? Got thrown away.
Well, you know, did you hear on the news today that the original plates of the Constitution have been found in an attic or a storage building in Illinois? Was it?
I thought they were the 1900s, they were going back to the 1900s, they were placed in the 1900s of the Constitution.
along with the plates, they found,
And they found
printed copies. Now, that's what was printed in the 1900s,
Yeah,
but they think the plates are the originals.
okay.
That was my understanding. It was a bit confusing.
Yeah,
It was,
but you could buy them for $99, they're selling them for $99.
you could go online and buy the copy, not the
Not the plates.
Not the plates. Not the plates, but you could buy a copy for $99 that would have been printed from the original plates. That's what I understood. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Well, let's see. Now, some highlights of the Federalist. Now, these are the ones that you really need to know are important. So put a star or a circle or something beside them on that content list that I gave you. Number 10 is very important because Madison discusses the means of preventing rule by majority faction, and is generally regarded as the most important of the 85 essays for its philosophy. So number 10, extremely important. The next one is number 14. Madison takes measure of the United States. He declares it appropriate for a republic, and he concludes with a defense of the Constitutional Convention. Number 39 is considered a highlight. Madison presents the clearest explanation of what has come to be called federalism. So if you want to know more about federalism, go to 39. And in number 51, Madison argues for checks and balances. Another highlighted one is number 70. Hamilton now presents the case for a one-man chief executive. At the convention, it was suggested for 3. So there were lots of ideas, they just didn't want one man, called the president. They were just so scared of grabbing too much power. I wonder why. Hamilton lays, in number 78, once again, Hamilton lays the groundwork for the doctrine of judicial review by federal courts of federal legislation or executive acts. So that was very important. And number 88, very important because Hamilton makes the case that there is no need to amend the Constitution by adding a Bill of Rights because those provisions are already in it. He was convinced, that, in fact, they were afraid of the opposite, that if you did list them, if you left something out, the government would say, well, that's not one of your rights. So there was a danger in making a list. But as we know, the people won out and they got their Bill of Rights. First 10 amendments. Okay, now I want to tell you a little bit about Federalist 1, what's included in Federalist 1. I hope we'd have time to read it because they are short. Each of these essays is really quite short. Here is a list of what is being said in Federalist 1 by Hamilton. The fate of the nation is at stake. Can a people determine their own government? Big question. This experiment in government may guide the world. He said, if it works here, folks, it'll spread. Greatest challenge comes from local politicians. They don't want to give up the job they have and start a new government. Opposition from good and honest people. In other words, just because somebody's opposed to the Constitution doesn't mean that they're a no-goodnik, or they're a loyalist or something like that. He said, people can be honest and good and be opposed to this, because he didn't want anybody to feel, that they couldn't argue a point. Now, also, truth of motive exists, I've got exit, but it should be exists on both sides. So what is your motive for wanting to keep the Confederation? What is your motive for wanting the Constitution? There can be big truths on both sides, he points out. Another thing he points out is the opposition is very loud. Remember, Patrick Henry was one of them. Give me liberty, or give me. It can be fearful. Did you ever hear the tactic of spreading fear to get people to vote for something? And accusing. You ever heard of accusations being thrown around? That's not a new concept, folks. It was being done back then. A strong central government is essential to security. We cannot each take care of ourselves as states. You know, the British were still lurking in the woods around the states. They hadn't completely left that, neither had the French. They were just waiting to see if these 13 states could pull their act together, and if they couldn't, they were there to pounce. Beware of arguments not based in truth.
Oh, my God.
You know, make sure they,
Just sign it, read it later.
yeah,
Yeah. Or you can.
yeah, or just say anything you want to and say it's the truth. You know, if you want your
Yeah.
doctor, you can keep your doctor. Yeah, right. So, and the Constitution will protect your liberty, your dignity, your happiness, and it should be adopted. So, that's what is generally in Federalist 1. And that actually is the first, his first topic that he wanted, that he listed as one of the topics that he wanted to write about. And the reason for. Now, in Federalist 85, go on to 85, this is a comparison to the New York State Constitution. Okay, so his arguments are, one, the executive re-election is limitless. That was one of the big things. Hey, this president can be in there as long as he wants. You know, people can keep re-electing him.
Yeah.
Well, they did up until Roosevelt, and then they found out what happens when you have a 4-term president. Not so good. And that's when we got our amendment. But Hamilton points out, your governor can be re-elected as many times. Your Constitution, the New York State Constitution, does not stop that. There is no council, and I'm not sure what that means. I tried to find out what that means, but it wasn't explained. There is no Bill of Rights. You're yapping about the federal Constitution. Your state Constitution doesn't have a Bill of Rights, and he called these false arguments. You know, you can't say that the state doesn't need one, but the federal government does. Fourth argument, no freedom of press is guaranteed, and this was a huge one for the people. And number 5, you can't criticize the federal Constitution when the state Constitution is just as bad. So he really socks it to them. And then in the second half of Federalist 85, he says it's all about security, folks. He does a little fear-mongering, and he says restraint on local factions and insurrections. There had already been insurrections around that, you know, Washington had to send out troops to, and Hamilton was there to help put them down. He says it's going to keep your local politicians from having despotic rule. They're not going to be able to just be a governor of a state and become a king, because the federal government won't allow that. Keep foreign nations at bay. We will all work together to make sure that happens. So if New York gets invaded, the rest of us help New York. That was the idea. 4, prevent wars between the states. And boy, there was a lot of contention between the states at that time. A lot of, especially big states and little states, Rhode Island and Delaware, compared to the big populous states that had a lot of people in them. They were very worried about where they were going to fit in, the small ones. He Republican form of government to all, not just the high and mighty and the rich. The Republican form of government belongs to all of us. There would be no titles of nobility. And actually Hamilton wanted a title of nobility. He starts out such a lowly life and he ends up such an elitist. If you read, more about his background, he was just thinking that people cannot take care of themselves. They just can't do this, But he realized that something had to be done. So even though he wasn't entirely for the Constitution, he voted for it. However, the other two delegates from New York left the convention. They were so ticked off about the Constitution, they actually left. So anything Hamilton voted for didn't mean a thing. All he could do was talk, mainly. And he did contribute a lot. That was his biggest contribution, is he did have a lot of good ideas and challenged people on their thinking. But because his two cohorts would have nothing to do with a central government, his votes were just ineffective. And then number 7 is it will protect the property and credit for all. It's not going to be taken away by your mayor or your governor, whatever. The federal government will protect your property rights and your credit. Okay, folks. An hour and a half, we did it.
Very good.
What I hope this has done is inspired you to want to know more about the Federalist Papers. This inspired me, I'll tell you that much. I am really now going to be reading and studying them. I gave you different outlines, different ways you can read them. Kind of like when you read the Bible, some people read it chronologically. They have a chronological Bible now where, as it was written, that's the way, it's written. There are different ways of reading the Federalist Papers, and it may be you take a look at that 3-page chart I gave you and read all of them by Hamilton or all of them by Jefferson. What we want to do next month is take a group of them, and once again, I just need a copy of that, the list. We're going to take a group of them and tackle them. I haven't confirmed exactly who it's going to be or what is going to be covered, but I would suggest that you might want to be looking, let's go back to the outline. Be prepared with the Article of Confederation inadequate to the Union's needs, which is covers 1 through 9 or 1 through 10. Oh my goodness, 1 through 36. I guess So I would read those if you can for next month, because we will definitely be having a session on these for next month, and we'll let you know via the email who's going to be speaking and exactly which one. But if you come prepared, you will be a much better listener. Okay? And if you do a little studying on your own, you'll be a much better listener. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Can you repeat
What's
The letters for,
What's that?
which ones are we supposed to be reading?
Well, I suggested anything in the area of 1 through 36. I doubt that we're going to cover, even that much, but we're going to be talking about those first ones to begin with, because that really sets the tone of all the reasons the articles didn't work, and we'll really delve into the articles. It would pay you to get a hold of this book, or online, you can find the Articles of Confederation, read them for free. But they're also in here. So if you would like that book, I can help you get it, or, like I said, I think I have a couple of extra copies tonight. Any other questions? forward to this study, and I hope you are too. And I hope this has just tweaked your interest in something that usually stays on the shelf because it's so hard to read, but now it isn't. And you will find, if you read the original ones 2 or 3 times, they start making sense. They really do. It seems to me that they turn the sentences around in the Old English. What we would normally start a sentence, they kind of put at the end. And they use huge words. So I had to look up some of them. I had no idea what they meant. So it's really, it's like sitting next to the founders and picking their brains for what did you mean by this? What did you mean by that? And you're going to find out these things. And it's going to give us such powerful arguments to defend our Constitution from people who want to just get rid of it. Bill Ayers, did any of you get to hear the Bill Ayers and DeSeuss? Did you get any? I heard it. It's sickening. I mean, it was very interesting, but absolutely, we don't need the Constitution.
Right.
Ayers.
See how we can buy that.
It was online. I sent it to everybody to try to get people to watch. You can still watch it on DeSeuss's, DeSeuss, yeah. Dinesh D'Souza. You can go to his website and still hear it.
Well, who's he?
Hmm?
Who's he?
Oh,
He's a political prisoner now.
yeah, he's pretty much a political prisoner now, yeah. Oh, the Obama administration is after him now. He made a movie about the president.
Obama 2016.
Obama 2016, if you haven't seen that. And so he's on the you-know-what list. And they're now accusing him of something in campaign contributions. He gave too much money, I guess, so they are after him. So it's interesting to keep up with his newsletter because he tells you what's going on.
Well, he doesn't want to see the Constitution filed, that we don't need it.
Oh, D'Souza defends it.
This was a debate between
Him and
D'Souza.
Him and Bill Ayers.
Bill
Who's
Ayers.
a constitutionalist, and Bill Ayers, who's a radical leftist.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Ayers and the president agreed.
Oh, yeah.
Of
yeah,
course,
it's like this,
of
yeah.
course. Although they don't really know each other,
Of course.
Yes.
I think what they're accusing this gentleman of is.
I'm sorry?
What they're accusing this gentleman of is talking a few of his college buddies into donating to a campaign and then reimbursing them.
Okay, is that what it is?
Yes. And
Okay,
he said that's what the charges are.
okay. So did he do it?
He said that's what the charges are.
Oh, okay. So I guess it remains to be seen if he actually do that. Of course, nobody else does that.
Well, he's indicted for it, so he really can't talk about it.
Right, he's indicted for it,
Well,
exactly.
I want to thank you for this. This is a lot of work on your part.
Yeah, it is.
Well, it's work I really enjoy. I just, for a couple of weeks, I gather all my materials, and then for a couple of weeks, I just kind of hide away. I hardly do anything besides eat, sleep, and get up and read and write again. And you immerse yourself in it, and this is something I've wanted to do for a long time, so it gives me an excuse not to do housework. All I do is walk my dog, and eat a sandwich.
That year after that, my wife's honey-do list all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're very welcome, and see, I learned right along with you. This is all new stuff to me because I knew this had to be important, and the more I dug, the more I found that I thought would be useful to you in your study. So I hope you will really want to get into it. And again, if you want me to order a book for you from Amazon, I can do that. And right now they're costing. I found a place where they are costing $5. That includes the shipping. So it costs more for the shipping than it does for the book.
This will never be in our future kids' history book.
No. Our children, I didn't learn anything about the Federalist Papers in college or high school.
They won't even know it after.
I just knew what they were, that it was writings about the Constitution, but I never.
My daughter got it in high school, but she was in an AP class,
no way of knowing what the founding fathers intended.
Yes.
So not only do they not teach this, they say you can't know. So there's no point of even trying to go back. As my ironically named Professor Freeman, because he was anything other than about freedom, he said, we just have the words now, let's just work with them.
Yeah.
Which of course gives rise to a judicial oligarchy. Anyways, just in case anyone's wondering exactly how bad it is, you're indoctrinated the opposite way.
Yeah.
Because I know
Well, they don't even use the Constitution. Mostly, from what I understand, the lawyers are being on precedent, right? Cases are more tried on precedent than what the Constitution says. So,
can they back up any of this, because I know Madison was a prolific writer.
Yes.
That man, I don't know why he didn't have time to do anything else, but he wrote a lot. Is there any way that they can back up through other parts of his writing what he wrote in the Federalist Papers?
oh yes, in fact,
So-
here are 2 other volumes that I came across and purchased. These were not cheap, but this is called The Debate on the Constitution. And this is filled with letters, personal letters, for and against, plus the essays themselves in here. So these are, available for purchase online as well. And this is something I, hope to wade through. And
You were a history teacher?
no, elementary, but I love history, and especially American history. Have always loved American history and our founders and our framers. I don't know why, but it's just always been a huge thing.
So then you must love Philadelphia.
I do. I'm telling you, when I go into that convention hall, I get chills.
Same floor.
Just thinking, I look down and think, Washington walked here.
Well, we know where he slept.